Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, 5 Crucial Criteria When Evaluating NextGen MES Solutions. My name is Jen Diamond, Product Marketing Manager at Tilap. There are many reasons to consider a next-generation MES solution to replace your current solution, either partially or fully. It is difficult to know how to evaluate it against a solution that has been around for decades. To avoid pitfalls that can cause you to stumble with the implementation or the headaches later on, it is important to consider more criteria than with traditional MES solutions. In this webinar, we'll address these criteria, potential pitfalls, and how to avoid them. So today's presenters are Sanjay and Jason. So Jason Dietrich is the head of revenue at Tilap, the leader in frontline operations technology. Prior to that, Jason worked at Stratus Technologies, where he served as Chief Revenue Officer, overseeing Stratus's global sales, marketing, business development efforts. He previously held roles at PTC focused on the adoption of ThinkWorks and Kepware, and Invensys, now Aviva, supporting Wonderware and workflow products. Sanjay Rajan is responsible for industry solutions, leading Tulap's go-to-market strategies in discrete and hybrid industries. Prior to that, Sanjay worked at Siemens, where he was responsible for their MOM portfolio that included MES and IoT targeted at discrete enterprise market. He also helped Autodesk launch their cloud PLM product, enables channels, and launch their Lighthouse customers for Autodesk's Fusion portfolio. So here is the agenda for today. During this webinar, you'll learn why it's important to remember what you're aiming to solve when evaluating solutions, answering the question, are you using yesterday's lens to evaluate tomorrow's MES, the 5 things to consider when evaluating MES solutions, and how to avoid potential pitfalls. At the end of the presentation, we'll leave time for Q&A. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please add them to the Q&A panel at the bottom of the screen. So with that, I'll hand it over to Sanjay.
Thanks, Jen, and welcome all. Thanks for joining us today. Before we get into the common pitfalls, I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to look at what's going on around us today and its implications on your MES evaluations, right? To begin with, it's the first thing is what I call frontline focus, right? So digital transformation itself, which is part of why you would want to pick MES, is at its core a human initiative, right? There is a study that really shows 70% of your mistakes in manufacturing are human-related, right? So investing just in automation, sensors, connected devices, and calling it a day is not digital innovation, right? We think true change is really when you put that technology in the hands of those who understand manufacturing best, which is the workers, right? And allow them to reinvent their work, bottom up, right? Reinventing what's possible by working in a very flexible, dynamic user experience, for example, right? So literally, one of the lens that you want to use when you start evaluating this MES, which what I call yesterday's lens, is not just having vendors repeat analog processes onto a digital screen. It's not just about digitizing or paper on glass, right? That alone is fundamentally flawed. So think about how MES can help workers reinvent what they do, right? So that's one of the lenses. The second one is, if you search today in Google for like MES is dead, you'll find a bunch of articles actually declaring it dead, right? And some say that it's resurrected back as IoT, right? Whatever the case may be, the underlying that is a lot of frustration about MES solutions in the market, right? So just ask IT teams, for example, that are tasked with supporting MES, and you'll get a lot of stories, right? There are 3 issues there. One is a lot of the solutions that's in the market, whether they are point solutions or MES, are pre-IoT, right? That's an issue. The other aspect is many of them were architected in the pre-cloud era, which means you probably get something that's very constrained to a single plant, highly customized in its connectivity and things like that, right? So, which brings us to the ISA model, or what I call now the blurred stacks, right? So the model itself is a very good abstract model, and many of you, if not all of you, have seen it, right? But something for you to realize in that model is that the lines are getting blurred, right? So the gap of between what today as an MES buyer you expect and what you get is widening, right? So what do I mean by a blurred stack, right? For example, today you should expect that you can take a torque gun or a printer or a machine that's at your level 1, right? And connect it to your application, print out a label, collect data, set a trigger for calibration. Things like that you should expect should take, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe an hour, right? not having to pull experts, control engineers, and IT people, and eventually give up on trying to implement such use cases on your current MES, right? So the second lens that I want you to think about is kind of the fact that these things are blurring, and how do you take that into account in your evaluation, right? The last part I'll just say is really what, for example, what AWS and Microsoft are doing, which is really starting to put a lot of manufacturing focus on their platforms, right? So Microsoft just announced their cloud for manufacturing support, which they are releasing, which is going to have IoT, cloud-based computing, AI, mixed reality support, and all of that. And they're really targeting agile factories of the future and workforce transformation, right? AWS is doing something similar. I mean, or their focus is really around AI ML for industrial. They're supporting a whole bunch of use cases on IoT, running things on the edge and connecting your devices. And they're also introducing ML services, right, for targeted at manufacturing. So what that means is that when you evaluate, the third lens that you need to apply is, are vendors taking advantage of these services, right? At the end, you need to bridge that IT-OT divide. And part of bridging that IT-OT divide is making sure that your vendors can run natively on your platforms, right? So those are the three kind of background things that I think one should consider before we get into kind of the nitty-gritty of how kind of the crucial considerations, right? So with that in mind, let's look at kind of the 5 crucial considerations. I'll let you folks read it, and then we'll go over this today. So the first one is really kind of what determines your solution implementation experience depends very much, and it starts early, right? So some of the questions that you want to consider is as early as when you write out your requirements and you solicit it across your operations and IT, and if you end up with like a 500-line Excel sheet, my advice is don't do it, right? I mean, so we'll talk about kind of how to deal with that. The other point is to say, well, don't I need to be accommodating everybody's need over time? Or should I be greasing just the squeaky wheel plant first, right? So it's important to look at these in terms of more holistically as you build your set of requirements, especially if you're trying to do evaluations across multiple plants, right? So the question then becomes, how do you plan this journey, and where do you start? And what you really don't want happening is getting overwhelmed. And then once you start adding up the RFQ costs, that's when typical MES initiatives start rolling to a stop, right? It becomes just too much to take on, right? So one thought there around the implementation is, at a very, very high level, what you want to think about is, how much inflexibility and risk are we taking on, and on one hand, and how much value can we see early, right? I mean, so if you look at the risk and the value, that's what I would recommend really trying to put that on a grid and really evaluate it, right? What you want is really very flexible, very scalable, and future-proof MES, right? And these solutions typically leverage kind of standard data model. They utilize, and going back to the earlier lens that we talked about, they should utilize microservices, right, that are connected to your platforms, right? And also should demystify IoT, by offering IoT edge bundles that are natively available in the solutions, right? And on top of that, what if you could have MES as a set of modular apps, right, which you could then deploy? And what that then does is help you avoid a whole lot of pitfalls and start to capture that early value by doing very quick pilots. I mean, these pilots need to be fast, simple, and targeted, right? So the characteristic of that MES is really around having a solid foundation, having microservices and flexible apps that allow you to grab that value faster, right? So we talked about these pitfalls. So, don't take the all or nothing approach, because it'll fail at the pilot level itself, because your pilot will become too big, right? Don't try to please everybody, because there is a way to deploy MES by filling the cracks approach, which means there are plants, you're already running a business. There are plants that have some elements of MES in there, some elements of automation in there. A very good idea is to take flexible, dynamic apps and fill the cracks and get the value on the use cases that you today don't have, right? So that would be for plants that are already running something, right? Suppose you're supporting plants that are greenfield and they don't have anything. then your pilot is a core set of MES apps that are very targeted that you then deploy, right? Again, back to the modular application approach, right? So the ways to avoid these pitfalls is, again, to think in terms of how much risk are you taking on with monolithic MES, and how quickly can you start delivering value, and that's what determines your solution implementation success. Right? I'll pass it on to Jason now to talk about data architecture.
Yeah, thanks, Sanjay. So I'm going to cover the next two topics. The first one being data architecture as a second pitfall that we see when deploying traditional type systems. When we think about an architecture from a data standpoint, we want one that's flexible, accessible, and ultimately has contextualized data. Not enough people think about the architecture they want to deploy. They don't think about their data model when they start thinking about ultimately how will I make decisions in my environment. So some of the questions you have to consider ultimately, how do I get a holistic view of my operations, and what data will comprise that overall holistic view? Can I add new data sources, whether that be from sensors, machines, cameras, or other business systems? And ultimately, can I take action in real time from the data that I'm collecting? We'll talk a little bit later about kind of how to solve this, but ultimately, data is just data until you're actually taking action with it and making decisions. So when we think about the potential pitfalls of laying out your data architecture and how NextGen MES can kind of rethink this, the first thing you want to try to avoid is any type of data architecture where you can't get that holistic view. You don't have data in a structure or a model that's accessible. You have data silos between teams or between systems. So again, there's not contextualized data. There's no model that links those together. There aren't the threads that allow you to look at that data in a more meaningful way. And ultimately, you might not have thought about how data is going to come into those systems, and is it structured in a way that we can actually use it for reporting and for decision making. So a lot has to go on in that beginning stages of laying out that architecture. The ways to avoid those pitfalls, the first thing we always say is, first, let's think about, what do we want to measure and what do we want to visualize? What do I want to get out of my systems, and what data will help me make decisions? Try to avoid rigid as-built data structures. We have flexible ways to craft the way data is captured and stored, and use those to your advantage. But ultimately, focus on value creation by converting that data into information, ultimately to make decisions to help you become more productive and more efficient. The next area I want to focus on is user experience, and this one's kind of near and dear to my heart. When we think about MES solutions and the fact that these are deployed in operational settings, whether that be inside the four walls or other areas of the extended supply chain, what we found traditionally is people forget about that frontline worker and the fact that the user experience has to be set up well for them to be able to perform the tasks that they do on a daily basis. So what we really think about as a pitfall is people forget about the frontline worker. They don't equip that frontline worker with the tools or the user experience that helps them do their job, again, more productively or more efficiently. So when we think about the questions you want to consider early on when you're thinking about your next solution for the frontline worker, what is the experience like for that end user? How do they interact with the system? What are the type of tasks they do on a regular basis to execute the work that they do? Is there a way to improve efficiency and error-proof their tasks? As Sanjay noted earlier, 70 to 80% of errors are done by humans. And if we can help those humans and those frontline workers, reduce the number of errors, that's certainly going to help us in the bottom line of the manufacturing facilities that we're dealing with. So when we think about user experience, what are the potential pitfalls? The first one is there are disparate systems scattered throughout the manufacturing and operational environment. And those disparate systems have different user experiences. Some may be very old, some may be rigid, some might have a newer look and feel, but don't quite meet the need of that frontline operator. They're typically error-prone, redundant data entry. We find that they have to go into multiple systems, sometimes to enter the same exact data. There's separate paper-based instructions that might be outside of that system that they have to execute manually. And it's a very dated user experience. What we look at are ways to improve that. is first start with the frontline operator and start to interview them and understand, what will make their life better. Think about those end users and how they work. Invest in ways to make that more flexible. We think about inside the four walls of manufacturing, but there are stranded assets. Give them the flexibility for mobile and tablets because they may not be at a workstation on a consistent basis. And consider layering new user experiences on top of your legacy systems. You might have legacy systems that work just fine. They have the right data model, the right data structure. You're collecting the right information, but the user experience doesn't quite fit that current operator need. You can layer in new tools on top of that and still get value out of those existing systems. So it's not a complete rip and replace. You can layer in technology on top of those existing systems. So with that, I'll turn it back to Sanjay to cover the next topic.
Yeah, the next one really is one around IT bottlenecks, right? Or removing IT as a bottleneck. IT organizations themselves have changed, and they're changing very quickly. The last team that wants to be a bottleneck is IT today, right? So how do you avoid that? And some of the questions that you want to consider as part of that as a team, and this goes for not just IT teams evaluating MES, but the business teams too, as collaboratively, is that I'm still surprised in many ways where I see MES, RFI, RFQs where the prospect doesn't seem to have a point of view on whether they want an on-prem or they want to host it or natively cloud. And I think that this is an important decision that you make. And there is a place for all of them, but it's an important point for you to think of how much IT support you will need over time to support a solution on a particular infrastructure, right? And the second giveaway for you on IT becoming a bottleneck is ratio of software to services. MES is notoriously service heavy, right? And it doesn't appear to be initially, but it quickly becomes. And then you get strangled by, in this case, either it's IT or system integrators, right? And I've been there in that situation, right? And the third thing to consider really is how much change do you expect in your MES, right? Are there potential acquisitions that are going to happen? Like plants, are you coming up with new products and new things that you're going to produce, right? Which have profound implications on your operation and execution, right? So these are the three things that you really want to consider. And to start avoiding some of that pitfalls is really picking the right combination of technology and platform, right? So again, if you don't want IT to become the bottleneck or get strangled by a system integrator, then there has to be some level of self-sufficiency that's built into the business, right? And to an extreme, it can be citizen development, right? That doesn't mean any citizen walking there, but it really means business users that understand their environment, that understand the requirement, and they're able to self-serve to some extent. So it becomes a very collaborative kind of a partnership with IT, right? And again, I'll say look hard at native cloud MES with microservices, again, back to that combination of technology and platform, right? And the last part is it's a simple test on kind of how MES can support a future need. I would always test an MES vendor to say, show me how you can incorporate a future use case of mine and show me how long it takes for you to incorporate it into your current solution, right? So there are ways in which you can test this and avoid that IT bottleneck, which has been the bane of MES in the past. Right?
So the last one that we want to talk about relative to pitfalls, and I saw there was a question on this one on the online questions, so thank you for that. We want to kind of tackle the fact that when you think about deploying a new system, there are a lot of components that go into that cost, and you have to think about this system as being in deployment for many years. So the first thing is, the questions we like to think about to avoid unnecessary costs and to really lower your overall total cost of ownership. First, start thinking about what are my upfront costs and my ongoing costs. And, the question that was asked was relative to what kind of cost we have to think about. And what I would say is it's not only your software and the hardware you may run that on, it's your internal resources to support that. It's the implementation services required to deploy, any customization that you do, and those ongoing costs, ongoing support and maintenance, any transactional costs. So we really want to start to think about what is that total cost of ownership And what does that look like over 5 to 10 to 15 years? Because we've seen these types of solutions are deployed and they stay in place for a very long time in most manufacturing facilities. Also, as you're evaluating your total cost of ownership, you want to be thinking about the benefits and time to value. The faster we can get value and see a return in terms of whether that's improved yield or improved productivity or whatever it may be, that's going to help us with our ROI, and that's going to offset some of those ongoing costs. So there's a cost profile, but there's also a value profile that you want to think about. So when we think about total cost of ownership, potential pitfalls, the first one is, depending on the system you put in place, you have a heavy reliance on the vendor for customization, for updates. And with that customization and updates, there's a cost associated with that because you're reliant on that vendor. You're paying that vendor to do those activities. You haven't been able to do it yourself or learn how to do it yourself. You have dedicated resources, whether they're IT or OT, but those resources add up over time. Not only is it a cost that you're sinking into managing the system, but it's actually an opportunity cost that those resources aren't doing other things for the business. And ultimately, you find that legacy systems, traditional systems, have a very long process for deployment. And ultimately, we found they have an inability to scale across the enterprise. And there's an opportunity cost with that as well. If you have 25 sites and the first site gets deployed and it takes 18 months, and the second site gets deployed and it takes another 18 months, and you decide that you can't go to sites 3 through N, there's a cost to the business there. And you have to think about that in terms of, what you're missing in terms of driving value for your business. So the ways to avoid that: focus on value, focus on long-term total cost of ownership, think about all potential costs. Infrastructure is one that a lot of people forget about. They think it's just the cost of doing business, but depending on how you want to deploy, that can be a substantial cost that you're not thinking about. And then consider the cost of compliance. Whatever solution you put in has to have the ability to provide you with regulatory compliance, whether that's for your individual vertical, whether that's cybersecurity, whether that's environmental health and safety. But there's a lot of compliance components that go into this decision. There's a cost associated with being compliant.
So that's really interesting, and I guess leads very well into the next section, which Sanjay will be covering on Tilap.
So I think there was a lead-in good question right on the questions that says, does Tilap consider itself a next-gen MES solution? And yeah, let's just talk about it. I mean, we definitely do. I mean, the whole thesis behind the creation of Tilap as a frontline operations platform, which is not to put ourselves into a box of MES or a box of IoT. Again, think in terms of that blurring the lines in an ISA stack, right? We really think supporting operations is like pulling at a bowl of spaghetti, right? You can't pull at a use case without it pulling at 5 use cases, right? So, ERP connectivity with IoT native support with the ability to create and deploy apps modularly is really what that frontline operations platform is. And what we did is really built it very purposely to be a future-proof next-gen platform by embracing no code, right? And for those who, I'm sure some of you in the audience have had experience with it or have heard of it, but for those who haven't, look at it. I mean, it's not just from a Tilap standpoint, but in terms of where business-to-business application development is going. No code is very fundamental to Tilap. It really means that you can deliver fast value without writing code, and to a large extent, break that IT-OT divide, because a good business user who knows their requirements can self-sufficiently serve themselves, right? Taking that IT bottleneck off, right? And the second piece of it that's built natively into Tilap as part of that next gen is IoT native, which means we provide hardware, we provide connectivity to that hardware, and we take that last mile problem away, right? The last mile problem is really that device and sensor connectivity, and we kind of bust that and demystify it with Tilap. And all of that is on an application platform where we have a whole library of applications, and we have application suite bundles that serve multiple industries, like pharma, discrete, hybrid industries. One of the questions that was asked relative to that is regulated industries like pharma. How do you handle MES there with respect to change management, right? I don't want to give the long answer here, but Tilap is GXP ready, right? And it's validatable. We are today running on a connected pharmaceutical drug product line, for a household name, right? We are fully operational in a class 3 medical device, right? So being on the cloud and being a NextGen doesn't mean that it doesn't support the fundamental regulated needs, and so Tilap supports that. So we'd love to talk to you more about that. And part of all this effort of us doing it over the last few years is that the reward is Gartner sees it, right? I mean, we are the number one challenger in this quadrant. Many of you may have seen it. We are unique in the sense that we are next gen. I mean, there are great MES solutions out there, but again, we talk about what are the lenses that you want to use to view and evaluate your MES. And Tilap stands out in our opinion, and our aim is to move northeast on this quadrant. I mean, and complete our vision as well as provide MES across all industries. Right. Just one quick view here of what does that NextGen MES platform look like, and at its heart, it's a platform that brings kind of a lot of things together to really promote very flexible and very fast app build, app development and deployment, right? So we say it, and we say it very earnestly, that if you know PowerPoint and you know Excel very well, then you're already 70-80% of the way in terms of being a Tilap user, right? And again, we use this drag and drop user friendly dynamic app builder to build where you can build your own apps. Plus, we also have a lot of pre-built templates, library apps, and solution bundles that support multiple industries. So go check that out on our library page, and it's right there. With that, I'll hand it back over to Jason to kind of sum it up for us.
Yeah, thanks again, Sanjay. We covered a lot in this. We try to spend time on kind of the 5 pitfalls that we see on a consistent basis as people evaluate their next generation set of solutions. And, we kind of covered those 5. We have 8 things that we think are advantages of next-gen MES solutions. And certainly I would be lying if I didn't say that we think that these 8 advantages certainly align well with Tilap as a frontline, worker and frontline operation solution. If we tie them back to some of the pitfalls, think about the implementation that Sanjay started with. And for us, implementation means, faster time to value. How do we get that done faster? And how do we enable citizen development? When we think about the data architecture that I covered, certainly data flexibility, adjusting our data structures to your needs, not having a rigid environment that's not, tailored towards your specific needs as a manufacturer and operation entity. We think about user experience, which many of you put as your number one poll experience. We think you have to have a solution that makes it easier for frontline workers to interact and add information to systems. You have to be able to completely tailor the experience for that frontline worker. And then we talked about IT. And what does IT care about? They certainly care about scalability. Can we start small and expand over time? Can we be agile and do iterative approach? Can we use that iterative approach to go from site to site across the enterprise? Is it cloud-based? And then when we talk about total cost of ownership, all of these kind of apply, but certainly faster time to value kind of comes back into play, scalability so that you can go across the enterprise. So, these are 8 things that we think are really important to any next-gen decision you make. There was a question in here if we consider ourselves a next-gen MES, and Sanjay kind of covered it earlier. Again, we would say we're all about the frontline worker. And, sometimes we actually say, as Sanjay said, MES is dead, or we're no MES, or we're just a platform that allows you to solve problems that meet the needs of manufacturers and operators. And if that's MES next gen, or if that's IIoT, or if that's a frontline worker, application, our goal is making your people more productive, more efficient. And we think these 8 things are important to whatever that solution, however you want to deem it or call it. It's important to think about these things as you do your next generation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen, who's going to help close this out. And then we're going to go into a Q&A session, I believe. So I'll give it to you, Jen.
So upcoming webinars. So we have one scheduled for August 5th on machine monitoring. So that kind of goes into a little bit what we were talking about with data architecture and being able to pull in more things. And basically this will be tying in what information you can pull from machines and how to holistically pull in information so that you can get like a larger view. So that's coming August 5th. So look out for that. And then with that, we can lead into the Q&A session. So what are the pros and cons for cloud versus on-premise solutions? Would you be able to answer that, Sanjay?
Oh, yes. Long answer. I'll ask Jason if I miss a point out. On-prem versus cloud is interesting. And I think, again, like there is a place for on-prem, there's a place for cloud. What I would say in terms of what's your DNA, right? What are the couple of factors that you want to think about? One is straight out of the mind, do you need to support multiple plans, right? Which means, and what is the consideration? What's the difference between trying to do on-prem there versus cloud? The other thing is, what's your IT DNA for your organization, right? Are you used to, you want to treat it like an ERP where you have a dedicated IT team that has an ERP badge on it that's supporting it 24/7? If that's your DNA, then on-prem may work, right? So essentially, what's the DNA? Where is your IT organization going? What's your ecosystem of plants? I mean, these are the things that you want to consider when you think on-prem versus cloud, and the cost of on-prem versus cloud, and more importantly, the flexibility and scalability of supporting your organization over time, right?
All I would add, is the two things that come to mind a lot for me are, one is the infrastructure associated with on-prem versus cloud. Having your own data centers and your own infrastructure versus, leveraging, an AWS environment or an Azure environment. And, what does that mean for your IT organization, to Sanjay's point? And then two, it's really, for me, the question that came up earlier on change management, you can argue that being in the cloud actually makes it substantially easier for change management because you have an instance, you have multiple instances. You can decide when those updates happen in that cloud environment, and natively everybody who uses that is now up to date versus going on-prem, site to site, data center to data center. So we really look at it as a game changer in terms of overall support from IT and the costs associated with it.
Okay, I have a question here. It says, I am racing to implement Tilap against a team that is trying to get funding for a clunky MES system. Any advice?
I can take that one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we go after this almost on an everyday basis. The specifics may vary, so call us. We'd love to just take up this challenge and help you with it. So go reach out to us. But I just say this: it's all about use case, and value, right? Is break up the ask for what's the primary use case. If I have to solve one thing, what is it that I need to solve, right? And just relentlessly focus on it and go show that value, right? MES smears the value, right? MES is great over time. I mean, but it smears value over time, and it's very difficult to get that value. So challenge your business user and say, I'll race against a use case and a value and start the clock, right? I mean, I would break that problem down into something digestible and then prove and show the Tilap value there, right?
Yeah, and Sanjay, just again, I don't want to keep piling on, but I sold MES systems for over 15 years. Sanjay did the same. And what I found in most environments, where I found the biggest thing that I saw over and over again was you had X amount of functionality that you got with an MES system, and people only needed 20% of X. So to Sanjay's point, if you can fill a gap, do that 20% quickly, get it installed, get people getting value from it, and then slowly but surely build on top, versus trying to deploy 100% of something that you only need 20% of. And I think that's your selling point against kind of a full MES is simply, do you really need all that functionality? And if so, does that functionality actually meet your needs? And if the answer to either of those is no, then you go with something that's built for purpose, quick, and get started, get iterative, and get value.
So there's a question here about, do you have any articles or case studies demonstrating how machine learning can be implemented at Tilap? I can actually answer that one. So this is actually very future facing for us. We have a new team, actually they've been around for a while, but called Tilap Labs, and they've been working hard. We have PhDs, people that really know machine learning and AI, working in that team to implement things like Tilap Vision and other like exciting new initiatives. So there's a page on our website that goes through that. And we also have 2 case studies that we're working on with customers that go through how they're using Vision. So look forward to that. So that's just the answer to that question. Anything to add there? Sorry, guys.
I just wanted to add one thing there this is yet another one of those lenses, if we had time, that we would talk about evaluating MES. Absolutely, we are excited about all the work that we're doing with AI ML, and to add to Jen, there are specific use cases around understanding vibration profiles in heavy equipment, predictive monitoring, putting current clamps and looking at how you can do OEE without and create machine states using ML without any operator interaction. So look us up on the website, and we would love to discuss this. This is a key thing in which we are investing. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. So question here, how does shop floor scheduling work with Tilap? What is the outcome and input to the MES system?
I'll keep this answer short because scheduling by itself is a topic, is a long topic. Tilap is not an APS today. Someday we may build APS functionality into the platform and into applications. Today, think of Tilap more as a dispatcher of work orders. We can put it on a schedule. We can look at availability of resources, right? You can put a Tilap edge device and say how many machines are available, what stations are available. So you know availability, and you can schedule based on availability. But ideally, Tilap should be fed with an APS, advanced planning or scheduling, or a ERP module that does that gives Tilap an optimized list of work orders to go execute on.
Yeah, and ultimately we end up being that work queue for a work center to allow for the execution of those. But I agree with what you said, Sanjay.
Okay, so question here, what has been the blocker for multi-plant MES?
I'll take that one, and then Sanjay, you can pile on. So,
sure.
I started with this one a little bit earlier in my talk track around cost and the opportunity cost. It really boils down to a couple things. Number one is traditionally, the implementation cost with the traditional MES is high and the duration is long. So there's aspirations to roll something out across the enterprise, but due to the constraints of that implementation cost and that time, there's a barrier to scaling across the org. The second thing is, even though plants like to be the same, and even if you're manufacturing similar things, not every plant is the same. So when you have a monolithic system that might fit one site, it might not fit the other site 2, 3, 4. So you end up having to customize, and you end up making changes, and you end up going through another implementation process that can be lengthy. The third is just the fact that it is on-prem, and we talked about it. The deployment, building out the infrastructure, doing all the connectivity, deploying, out to workstations. So over time, what we found is between cost of implementation, time of implementation, ultimately not getting the value they expected out of that large expense, it kind of shutters the fact that it never gets across the enterprise. Sanjay, anything you'd add?
No, I think the proof is in the pudding. I agree with everything in there. I have been in the MES world for over 18 years, 15 at least, and I've struggled to do multi-plant implementations. It's fundamentally limitations in technology being on-prem, and what Jason said in terms of idiosyncrasies, right? Reality is at Tilap, and not to pat ourselves on the back, but already we have customers who are running OEE across 7 plants, right? I mean, pharmaceutical companies looking to running, batch record collections across 10 plants, right? I mean, we are there today. We are already implementing multi-plant, and our customers have huge plans of going 100 plus 135 plants running OEE all at the same time, right? So we are there. We are doing it today. Part of it is, again, what I just said, right? Our platform, our approach, and our future-proofing what the MES foundation is and how we have defined it allows us to do that scaling.
Awesome. So there's a question here. What support does Tilap provide for providing or building the business use case or use case? Basically says, our business knows what we can do better, but we don't know what we don't know. A new tool on a bad process will give us the same bad result.
So is the question more on how can we support build business case?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Talk to us. So again, I'll put a personal note in here. I mean, we have folks. I mean, Jason comes from the world. I mean, in his introduction, I mean, he's PTC. I came from Siemens. The reason, a part of the reason we are here is we not only love the Tulip technology, we love the products we sold before. It's nothing against it, but we also come into Tulip with a lot of business experience, right? I mean, so we are not just a technology company. We have staffed ourselves to support business cases. We understand manufacturing language. We are steeped in manufacturing DNA. There's a bunch of us with gray hair like this in here for what it's worth. Talk to us. We'll help you build the business case. That's the fun part of applying Tulip to the existing business cases is something we all love to do. So reach out to us. We have a team.
Absolutely.
Okay, sorry. Cool. Okay, next question is, how does the solution work in manual processes where there's no automation layer and just people?
So I'll take the lead on this, Sanjay, and you please chime in. So I think, certainly, our technology is set up such that you can be in a manual environment or an automated environment or a hybrid where you have a little bit of both. Depending on your use case, let's say it's dynamic work instructions or manual work instructions, we can deploy with zero automation just to walk an operator through the tasks they have to do to complete their operation. It can be an environment where there's some automation, also manual, and there's components of those steps or those tasks that are manual, and some where we will get from sensors or from automation. We can also help you, depending on your environment, automate where appropriate or sensor where appropriate. But, again, because we're focused on the frontline operator and many operators do a lot of manual work without automation, our platform is perfect for those environments. It's a sweet spot for us. We do a lot in discrete assembly where it's fully manual, and it's a great fit for our solution. Sanjay, please add.
Yeah, Jason, you hit it. I'll just give the next level detail to it, which is, this is a great question. I love it because it's not the switch from I want to go from manual to semi-automated to automated has been that last mile barrier to entry, right? Where you need a controls engineer, an electrical engineer. This is why we have factory kits, right? And edge devices. So deploying or supporting your manual with a pick to light, a foot pedal, a brake beam, right? These things are demystified completely. We sell them. We sell it as a vertical solution mainly because we don't want you to go, being stuck purely manual, right? So we have this hybrid kind of an approach where we can help you. Go look us up again. I mean, you'll see that there is a reason why we try to solve that last mile problem with our factory kits.
Perfect. So there's a question here. So rip and replace with the NextGen MES. How can I reuse what I have?
Yeah, that kind of goes back to the user experience topic we talked about. I think, we do this a lot. So because our tool, our platform is very easy to build screens for the frontline worker, what we found is if you have a system in place, it may have a dated user experience, but has a good underlying set of functionality, a good underlying data structure. It's performing for you, but it's just not meeting the needs of your frontline workers and your operators. You can layer a tool up on top of that as an and solution, not an or solution. And we kind of joke, but you can give your old systems a facelift, with a new platform, and make that user experience a lot friendlier for that operator, make their life a little bit easier, make them more productive, more efficient. So, we never go into an environment and say, hey, after our assessment, you must rip that out in order to put in Tulip. It's usually you've got a few systems in place. Let's figure out how to fill gaps, and let's layer in Tulip to meet those gaps and augment what you already have in place.
Awesome. Anything to add, Sanjay?
No, I think Jason covered that. Yeah.
Perfect. So there's a question here on are the slides available for attendees, and has a session been recorded and it can be made available? Yes to both questions. So we are recording right now, and we will be packaging up the recording with the slides, and that will be available. We actually sent to you after the event. So there's that question, and then let's see.
I see one on how does Tulip control the different modules into a batch record?
Yeah. Oh shoot, yeah, there was that one on the bottom. So how does Tulip control the different modules into an overall batch record process? Is there one overall record, and how are they treated differently?
Yeah, I'd like to take that. And I'll give it in both contexts, and then the answer is the same. Whether you're in discrete manufacturing creating digital history records, or let's go to highly regulated environments like pharma where you have an electronic batch record, it works kind of the same. The answer is it's not one or the other. There are overall records where there is an aggregation of all the individual records, right? So think of you're in and you say module, I say app. let's say you're in an equipment, line clearance app where you're doing line clearance and you're doing some audits, right? Or you're in a quality app, or you're in a equipment asset maintenance app, right? All of these apps are doing something in the context of a batch that's running. So point is, we create individual records within these apps, but then we aggregate all of those records with timestamps along, and then aggregate them so that you can report on them in aggregate, right? And one advantage of being on the cloud is storage is elastic, right? I mean, compute is elastic, right? So which means if you add process data to it, time series data to it, you can add all of that in context, throw it up on the cloud, and report on it. So we absolutely do both, which is manage overall records, and they are a collection of these individual batch records coming from each app.
Okay, so I think we have time for one or two more questions. So there's one here. Okay, well, I'll ask this one. How easy, difficult is it to integrate Tilap with ERP or third-party BI tools? Is that done in real time? So I'll give that to Sanjay.
Yeah, it's easy, and it's been done, and we can show you examples of it. So one of the things in Tilap is what we call a Tilap connector function. You can look at examples of it. I won't take up too much time, but reach out to us. I think we have demos of it up on YouTube itself. But we have a Tilap connector function that's either it's connecting to BI tools or to ERP or to CRM. We connect live. In most cases, we don't need middleware to broker things. If we need to, sometimes there are middleware involved. But yeah, absolutely. We connect to, especially we have done our customers. I know of customers with Power BI who absolutely push, we use that as the analytics with Tilap as their MES.
Yeah, and then
so the answer is it's not difficult. Sorry, let me answer it. It's not difficult. That part is super easy. Let me make it clear. Very easy to do.
To build off of that, so we actually have the Tilap library, which I know Sanjay mentioned earlier. So in the Tilap library, we have a section on connectors, which include I think 15 or more different connectors that we have that are pre-built. So you can just download them and start using them. And then there's also unit tests that kind of walk through what are all the different things that you can connect and what data can you pull back and forth. So just build off of that. And then last question, does Tilap offer an offline mode in case of interruptions to the cloud?
Today, no. I mean, there are ways around it to go into offline mode where you can pull data locally. Tilap can write locally mission-critical data so that work goes on. And on restart, essentially, we update those records back into the cloud. But I don't want to, by any means, to say that that there is no strategy involved here, or there isn't a little bit of thinking involved here to support it in offline mode. That's done more on a case-by-case basis. But we'll get there. Something that we will put into the platform. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I'd say is we find that, to Sanjay's point, certainly between ERP transactions or any data from machines, within the tools that we're connecting to, we typically find a way to do queuing, to do some store forward. It's not a holistic thing that we've finished yet within our platform. We are thinking about ways to do that and working on that, but we have done it, through the connectors that we've worked with to have that kind of staging of data to deal with any potential interruption in service.
Okay, so I'm going to quickly share my screen to share this one last slide about our community. So we have a growing community in lots of different places that you can find information. So we have a really great Tilap University that has courses that guide you how to use Tilap with introductory courses, as well as more advanced courses that go through more specific things like machine monitoring, analytics, all of that. We also have a podcast that's run by Trond, who is on our team, and he interviews different people throughout the industry, just talking about what they're seeing with the new era of industrial operations, and I would highly recommend that. There's the Tilap community where you can ask questions, talk to other people that are using Tilap to build apps, see that, and then also library, which we've been mentioning a lot today. So that's a resource that you can use to access pre-built apps, app collections, app suites, templates to help get you started, as well as connectors. We also house all of our devices that we connect to there, so you can browse through that as well. And then there's one last poll question you sort of seen pop up, and that's how do you rate this webinar? So if you can please answer that and provide any feedback, that'd be really helpful for us to continue to create webinars in the future. So I think that's all. I see that Sanjay is answering one last question, but I think that's all for today. Thank you all so much for attending. Thank you to our speakers, Jason and Sanjay. Look forward to an email that has the presentation and the recording. And we hope that you attend more webinars and events in the future. Thank you.